architects, engineers, electricians, contractors, and developers for joining today's presentation, Lunch and Learn, on our new design and construction guide for commercial services. My name's Marie Mendez Nunez. I work in Utility Standards Engineering team, and this guide just went live first week of October. So today we're going to go through the highlights of it and give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have. This is today's agenda. We're going to open with some opening remarks. In a minute, then we'll start the main presentation on the preliminary information, pre-design and design information. Next, we'll go to the pre-construction and construction phases of the document. And lastly, we'll end with that Q&A period. For today's meeting on Teams, you'll have the best experience using Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. During the presentations, all attendees will be muted. To unmute yourself, if you want to ask a question at the end, go to the upper right corner and see that little mic icon and turn it on. If you're on a phone, use *6 to unmute yourself. Also be aware that if you have a phone and a video recording, you do need to mute your audio on your computer. As we progress through the presentation, feel free to use the chat feature to share your comments and questions. We welcome them. Just note that we won't be answering questions until the very end of the presentation today. My goal today is that everyone here feel respected and valued. To achieve this, I ask everyone to agree to this interaction agreement. Please be polite and respect all the participants on the webinar, their comments and questions. Everyone wants to feel respected, heard, listened to, and answered. And stay on topic. We're going to be focusing on the commercial guide and not questions specific to a job site. Lastly, share the airtime. When we do have a Q&A session, please step up with your questions. We really do welcome them. This is a great opportunity to ask them, and then step back for those who might need more silent space before they feel comfortable asking their questions. So the electricians on this call are likely very familiar with PGE's Electric Service Requirements book. For anyone not familiar with it, it provides a lot of information on our temporary services, overhead and underground clearances on Section 4 and 5, and a lot of amperage related information on metering. The commercial guide is a supplement to the ESR, and it focuses on infrastructure information for each phase of a commercial project, along with some key administrative information. We also have a subdivision construction guide. If you're familiar with that, this commercial guide will be very similar in structure, following the different phases of the project. You might see on the right here the medium voltage requirements book. That's for our very large customers that are served by medium voltage, which is generally they own and maintain the transformers on their property. So data centers, solar farms, and a couple of hospitals. All of PG's public documents are portlandgeneral.com/ESR. Please take a moment to download a copy of this commercial guide. It's the third item down, so you can follow along with us today. I'll try to point out the page I'm looking at, so if you want to scroll to it, you can do so. Some of you might prefer a physical copy. We do pass out physical copies of the ESR and the subdivision construction guide. We are not yet doing so for the commercial guide, but we do plan to do so in Q2 of 2023. This is the scope of our commercial guide. It's for customers 400 amps and greater, so this excludes residential shops and barns. But it includes a wide variety of commercial customers, small commercial customers, medium size, large industrial, and everything in between. We're aiming to support new, rewired, relocated, or temporary services, and they're the designs to support secondary services. So this is not for medium voltage customers. It doesn't have sufficient information to adequately support certain civil infrastructure projects like bridge crossings or railroad crossings, though it could be helpful for those. You'd still need additional information from PGE. And it doesn't provide adequate information for municipal projects like street widening. The main goal is to provide Q&A for frequent questions and answers that we provide in the field and address certain issues that we've seen. So our focus here is design and construction information from the customer installed equipment to the service. Key parts of PG's internal standards are made public. So that's a key piece. We have orally transmitted this information, but we're now trying to proactively provide it earlier in the process to increase awareness. And I think this goes without saying, but this is not a PG approved job sketch. There will be site conditions that may warrant other items or other requirements that you might discuss with a design project manager and a field construction coordinator. So always go with whatever your approved job sketch is. The first three sections here are the preliminary information, the pre-design, and the design. And these are largely targeted for architects, engineers, developers, construction contractors, and consultants. Out of curiosity, could all the architects use that little reaction emoji and raise their hands so we kind of have an idea how many architects we have in the room today? Welcome. Could all of the engineers raise their hands so I have an awareness of how many civil, electrical engineers, and others that we have? Welcome. Oh, today we've got a lot of engineers. This is our second presentation this week, and with the earlier one was on Tuesday. They're identical presentations, and you can lower your hands. And all the developers and construction contractors, could they raise their hands here? Quite a few. Welcome to you. So today, you can expect to leave with better understanding the steps required from the pre-design stage to the energization of the service. One of the most important steps in that pre-design phase is reviewing clearances. I understand they're not sexy, but PG does a lot of redesigns that require architects to redesign their landscaping, parking, or even sometimes the main floor of their building. And unfortunately, this isn't uncommon, and it's more common than we like, really anyone would like. One example that comes to mind is that recently PGE energized this upper left transformer. And later, upon returning, we discovered that the customer installed an ADA ramp right in front of it. So we were unable to open the transformer and did not any longer have our safe work clearances. The middle top image shows some of the final building clearances. If PG determines that there isn't room on the customer's property with space for safe working clearances, PG will require Class A room within the building, like the one on the top right. Obviously, adding room to fit 1 to 3 5 by 9 foot transformers with required working clearances is not an insignificant redesign of the main floor of a building. So our goal here today is to build a partnership with earlier communication with architects, engineers, and developers so we can save time and money and improve our customer experience. For the construction contractors, civil engineers, and excavators on the call, and I know we asked about construction contractors earlier, but could you raise your hand again if you're a construction contractor? Oh, thank you for joining us today. And any civil engineers on the call? I'm here. Thank you for joining. Any, out of curiosity, any excavators? Thank you for joining us here. In this section, the pre-construction inspection and construction requirements, we have a lot of pictures, drawings, and text showing PG's installation requirements for pads, vaults, and conduit. For example, in section 6.5.3, we provide text and drawings for conduit installations for pad-mounted transformers. Before, this information was on our job sketch and transmitted orally, but there's only one PG job sketch, so the information was not always readily accessible to contractors, subcontractors, subcontractors. So this guide can easily be downloaded for a greater, larger audience. We've also provided kind of some examples of things we've seen in the last year that are walk-offs for us, or common problems that need to be resolved before we can move forward. Spacing within the opening of the concrete pad, the height, etc. We'll get into those more in the later half of the presentation. And lastly, I'd like to highlight the sections that are most likely to assist our electricians. How many electricians do we have on the call today? Welcome. Seems like we have at least one. We had several more, quite a few on Tuesday. This guide isn't as focused on electricians as the ESR. So you're going to see that the information you're most likely to use is in various sections. The first at the start with the design and construction considerations and timing that can be helpful for all those here on this call. We've added quite a few pieces of information on the timeline. Second up, the customer gear review process. Many of you are already familiar with it, but we do have a checklist now of the items we're going to request from you in section 3. And lastly, in section 6, we have additional information here on the conduit installed in switchboards. We provide some dimensions, what that minimum opening in the termination pole section will be with typical PG conduit configurations. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Before jumping into the 6 sections, I just want to point out here that if you've ever wondered what each PG team does, this chart on page 5 and 6 should help you out. It provides the PG teams assisting with the request for service phase, and then those PG teams assisting with the application review and construction phases. If, for example, you've recently been contacted by a construction project manager, a CPM, this is a new position for PGE, and they facilitate project coordination after the PG approved job sketch has been issued. So you can see that here. So we're going to jump into section 1, preliminary information, on page 1 if you're scrolling on your digital copy of the commercial guide. This section is dedicated to process information. It has a lot of key details that are not available on PG's website, and we're going to go over the request for service checklist and the design and construction timeline. Before doing so, though, I'd like to point out section 1 has information on how to get information on renewables, on our fleet partner program, that's PG's EV program, and the dispatchable standby generation, which is a program for larger batteries and diesel generators that is very popular. These are much easier to join and apply for at the early stages of a project. So we recommend that customers start their applications for renewables, net metering, fleet partner, and dispatchable standby generation at the outset of the project. And those are separate applications. This is a high-level timeline you'll find in each section of today's commercial guide. The stages of a project are listed here are sequential. So you do need to complete the design phase before you can enter the construction and inspection phase. The pre-design phase is often the longest and depends on receipt of required design documents. We very rarely receive all necessary project documents with an initial request for service. And ideally, customer documents are missing because the customer's project team contacted PGE early in the project to obtain those preliminary site-specific requirements, because that early communication is really helpful in avoiding costly redesigns and change order requests. But at the end of the day, PGE's job sketch relies on the final plans, those 90% plans. And because changes to grade or changes to landscaping, trees or bioswales or awnings and porches can significantly impact our clearances, and may lead PG to change the equipment that we've selected, its location at the site. So keep us as part of your partnership in giving us those updates. You can see on page 7, section 1.5, how to provide us updates to a drawing package. So the other thing to mention here is that some permits take quite a bit longer to obtain from the entity providing them. And for example, this commercial guide is not issued to support railroad crossings, but it's a classic example that obtaining those permits and river crossings as well can take 12 months or more. So just be aware that that's an additional time frame here. I do note that we don't list time frames, though it is a timeline considerations, and that's because the projects vary so much. The size of the project, the speed at which we receive the customer's documents, um, that it's really hard for us to just blank statement what each of these will be like. But I can say they are key steps in all commercial projects and that they are sequential for the most part. Moving to section 1.2.1 on page 3, you'll see this process in greater detail, how to request service. We're moving towards a digital platform power partner. So as you request that service, you will be asked questions. And to continue through that power partner process, you need to have information up front about the load, whether you plan to have EVs, street lights, etc. We are aware that sometimes people do not know that information. Just be aware, though, that later somebody needs to call from the project team and say, we do need streetlights. The municipality has required that, so that we can create an additional job for you for that piece. And it is very helpful if they're requested early, because they go into the same trench and conduit system, and will hold up that inspection by the municipality, which is required before PG completes its final inspection. So note to that. I'm going to move to the next page here. Page 4 of the commercial guide, if you're scrolling along on your own. And here I'd like to point out the job is on hold for obtaining permits and any special ordered equipment until PGE receives the line extension cost agreement and any required payments. So please, if you do receive a line extension cost agreement, sign it, provide payments as soon as possible. We do have customers that will hold off for 6 months, 9 months, and that means that we're holding off on your permits and purchasing your supplies. Also, it is only good for 6 months. And so if 6 months goes by and you contact us, we're going to reevaluate whether we need to redesign the job. We're going to evaluate our construction costs, and there is a fee for that. Construction timelines. Our material lead times have always been long, but with the current global supply chain challenge, these lead times have been extended. Like many of you here in the field are struggling with finding equipment that 5 years ago was very easy to find. Ours has always had kind of a longer lead time, and that there's no exception. We are doing our absolute best researching all possible alternatives, but it's a general issue throughout the U.S. So do submit that line extension cost agreement as soon as possible. And I did want to highlight here through the construction timeline, item number 7, customers passing PGE's final inspection by a service inspector. So a lot of folks assume that on the day of the final inspection, PGE will energize the service, and then are kind of disappointed when that's not the case. And they're like, wait, you don't have that magic baton to get our electricity on? And we'd like to, but the reality is we don't. Generally, it takes us between 2 and 4 weeks to do so. We'll return several times to the site to complete any landscaping or tree trimming required that we were agreed on that was our responsibility. The customer's tree trimming and landscaping needs to be done before we complete our final inspection. Obtain permits for flaggers and street closures if required, and the meterman to come and install the meters. And then finally, we build and energize the service. So on page 5, request for service checklist, um, this is a lot of it is information you may have seen before. It is quite a bit more detailed than our website because we're trying to provide you upfront all the different items we typically would like you to have when you apply. Um, One of the items, though, that often gets missed is temporary power. If a site is increasing the load, they have a elevator and it's for construction and it's being developed, especially for high rises, and the load changes, please give us a call, provide us an updated load sheet so we can assess whether the transformer at the site can adequately support your construction. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon to forget this step and blow a transformer, which leads the project to come to an abrupt halt. Um, Also, please note here that we do need those streetlight designs. I've made mention of that, but especially those frontage improvement plans. The sooner we get them, the better. We almost can't design our projects until we're aware of what that frontage improvement plan looks like, because that's often where we're looking to locate our equipment. And there is a more detailed list in section 2.7, required design documents. And that is just an awareness that as we get closer to that 90% of your project plans, there are quite a few different things that we will need from you, elevations, grade, etc. So that list is quite comprehensive and we feel is confident that the majority of projects often need quite a few of those documents. So let's get into the meat and potatoes for you. Section 2 is the first meat and potatoes of this document. Section 6 is the second one. The pre-design is really about the architects, engineers, contractors in the early phases of the project. And the Section 6 is about the construction. But this is PG's gift to you. We're really trying to be upfront and available by giving you these conversations we've had in the field for decades proactively. On page 10 of the book, section 2.2, important underground design decision, lists the key PG decisions for each service. Each bullet has its own subsection. So service type and location, size and location of PG transformers and or switches, pads, vaults, and conduit pathway, meter gear location and type, clearances required by PGE, and other requirements. So each subsection will kind of help you understand what's not possible, what is possible, and what might be possible, but should definitely be discussed with PGE. At the end of the day, PGE will own many of these decisions, like what equipment we select for the project. But we're trying to share them with you because we understand that often we're contacted later in the design process, and it would be helpful to have a little bit more information sooner. And we are aware that, architectural schools, engineering schools do not provide this information. So we want to fill in that gap with information that can really make us partners together. And also just an awareness that we come to these projects with different focuses, that you're looking at the timing, the cost, the customer demands, and those are really important. And we really want to support our communities and the building projects in them. And we are focused on safety, reliability, and maintainability of the service over 50 plus years with different building owners and renters. And so we want to meet each other together. So it's a cost-effective project. It can be on time, but it can also be safe and maintainable for 50 plus years with different building users. So let's take a look at section 2.2, location of PG transformers and switches, to kind of get into the meat and potatoes. PG needs space on customers' property for transformers and safe work clearances. And generally, when PG arrives to site, we need to find space, and the spaces are often impacted by parking or trees or other municipal requirements. This is definitely part of that pre-design process. And it's pretty common in all our regions: Salem, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Portland, Gresham, and honestly, it's getting harder with zero lot lines. So you might be thinking, okay, um, this is good to know, but what other options do I have? And Essentially, we'll get to those in a minute. But we do need the equipment within 15 feet of a drivable surface. And this is because our equipment's rather large, heavy, I'm going to show you a picture here. Our trucks are not the size of typical trucks. They're much taller, they're wider, and they're heavier. They break sidewalks, they damage landscaping, and they don't fit in most multi-level parking lots. So this is why we need our equipment within 15 feet of a drivable surface. Also because if an outage occurs in the evening or early morning, squirrels are very active early in the morning, we need to be able to access it quickly to restore power. Um, So we have a list here, which is new, which is not new to our company. It's not new to our requirements, but it's newly here published of the locations we will not locate transformers. Um, Traffic areas, parking areas, such as parking spaces, lanes in a parking area, driveways, areas associated with truck loading docks, or sidewalks. And some of you might be wondering, but I've seen transformers in parking areas, and you'd be right. Yes, absolutely. But once that transformer's in the parking spot, it no longer is classified as a parking spot. So that's why we have it listed there. Um, Lastly, just when all the sweeps and bends in a conduit are added up, the sum must not exceed 270 degrees. So that's a key piece of the puzzle about discussing the location of transformers. If you're wondering how big our pads and vaults are and their required clearances, you can take a look at Appendix C. We've compiled some of our most common commercial pads and vaults. You will not get to select your pads and vaults for your job. It will be on your approved job sketch. But we're trying here to kind of provide information about what they generally, the space they occupy, so you can ballpark it. Um, on the top, you'll see that looks identical to the job details that we provide customers. On the bottom left, these are kind of new and novel, trying to show you what those clearances are for that pad, on the sides and back and in front of them. And then on the right, the construction notes. And the very bottom, the contractor level required to install this pad. And we'll go over contractor levels later in section 5 of this presentation. So if we can't collaboratively find a location on the private property, and PG's like, yes, we agree, we just, it's not an option here. Though that is our strong preference. We want it on the outside so it's readily accessible. PG will require a Class A vault located at grade. And there are a lot more requirements for Class A vaults. So if one of your project does go that route, you will need to request the standard from the design project manager with whom you're discussing the site. It's LD 31007. And if you save a copy, be aware that it can be updated. So always request the latest, most current copy of that standard. But in general, how big does the room have to be is always the question. And it's kind of decided by these criteria. The crew installation requirements, so how close it is to drivable surface, what that entry looks like, what the safety hazards are by the entryway, is it flat, etc. The proximity to the electrical room, the closer it is to electrical room, the easier. And the number of transformers. So are we dealing with one transformer or 3 transformers? And each of those has its own required working clearances. Um, so we have information here about vault grade, location, and clearances for vaults. The one notable thing I wanted to mention here on unsuitable locations for vaults are bioswales or other similar structures. Well, we very much support bioswales. They're very good for the environment and they're good for all of our communities. Water and electricity don't mix. And so we do not locate a transformer behind a bioswale for the most part. Anything you want to add to that, Jake?
I think it was mentioned before someone asked about whether the conduits could go under bioswales or in bioswales. At this time, it's PGE does not prefer it, and most municipalities won't allow it. So it's not so much PGE says absolutely not. We prefer it doesn't go in there, but most of the municipalities don't want anything under or through their bioswales because it kind of defeats what that bioswale is trying to do.
And if I understand you right, also it's, if we have something that breaks and we have to trench that pathway, we're going to trench through the bioswale. So I can kind of see why that wouldn't be ideal. Um, just wanted to give folks a heads up with that because they're becoming more common throughout the territory. Um, so some folks might be wondering, okay, you had some information about pads. Here's some information about vaults and their required clearances. They're also in Appendix C. You can see how deep our vaults are to understand how deep the trenches are likely to need to be, um, and the space they occupy. Just a heads up that our 8 and 10 series vaults are not in here. They're our biggest vaults, just because they're often designed for the site and its clearances. So these are our most common commercial pads and vaults, though our 8 and 10 series are pretty common. They're not in here. So we're going to transition to clearance requirements. And some of the architects may not feel this is part of their job, but the decisions that the architects make and the engineers here on the call make about the roof and the windows, the balconies, the parking, the landscaping, the materials selected for the exterior of the building, all really impact PG's clearances. And one of the biggest reasons for our construction delays and additional customer costs are clearances that aren't considered in the early phase of a project before the customer contacts PGE. And these are key categories of vertical clearances and horizontal clearance requirements that we have to abide by. Just a heads up, we have the meter clearances, which lots of folks will remember. NEC and USERC clearances. We're USERC companies, so we follow those. For the electricians in the call, if you haven't downloaded a 2022 edition of the ESR, I highly recommend that you do it. Pull up section 3.9. We added table 4. It's very useful. It makes it easier to identify what section of the ESR you need to use based on the service type and gear rating. And the USERC requirements that are affiliated with that. So take a look at that. The fire safety clearances, generally a lot of people are aware of those, and they are in our ESR as well. The NESC clearances are the clearances that we as a utility need to abide by. And these are usually baked into our requirements and often have an adder that we've added on to ensure we're compliant. In talking about the clearances, just consider NEC and Oregon OSHA safe work clearances. They need to be considered by anyone supervising employees working in the vicinity of energized facilities. So consider those as well. Safe work clearances. These are often forgotten. So heads up, we've listed the ESR and there also some of them are in here. Our clearances from drivable surfaces, installation removal clearances that can be greater than those safe work clearances due to the size of the equipment needed to install a vault, and the landscaping clearances. So we're going to get into both the safe work clearances and landscaping clearances here today. We unfortunately don't have time to get into all the other ones, but here's some hyperlinks to kind of research those further if you wish. So these are pad-mounted transformer clearances. We do need 30 feet above pads. That includes awnings or balconies, really anything above the pad for fire safety. And 3 feet for single phase, 4 feet for 3-phase pads from the pad to any mature crown of a tree. And I say mature crown because it's often folks will put the trees like within 6 inches of those required clearances, which then means that the tree impinges on the safe work clearances. Later, 10 years, 20 years later, you'll see kind of oddly cut trees near power lines or electrical equipment, and that's not ideal for anyone. We love trees, and I assume you do as well. So if possible, please kind of keep that awareness of what that mature crown will look like in 10, 20 years. And lastly, we do need 10 feet in front of the opening area of the electrical equipment. You'll notice that the opening here is towards the sidewalk. That's often the way we design them. They're not always. So continuing to power line clearances, on page 2018, which digitally is page 26, you can see the information on power line clearances. The customer's team is responsible identifying those permanent or working line clearances and understanding what their minimum approach distances are. We we have tons of lines and equipment, and we can operate them at different levels. And so it is important to use those questions in the Oregon OSHA form FS 46 and then call service coordination to ask about the specific line and how it's being operated at that time to understand what those minimum approach distances are for the site. If you want to relocate overhead wires in a temporary fashion, you'll need to ask for a work order to do so. Um, Often we're able to do that, but just be aware that that does add time, evaluation, design, and construction costs and time to the project. And in some instances may not be feasible. Like it is feasible if it's a 2-3 year gap with $1 million budget, but that's not realistic, right? So there are times it's not possible. Um, to relocate wires in an area, maybe because of municipal restrictions, maybe because of proximity to a substation and the number of other customers impacted, just FYI. Okay, permanent power line clearances are different than those MAD minimum approach distances. We've provided here some of the minimum final building clearances, but our code is 600 plus pages. We cannot embody all the requirements in a one-page handout. So just to be aware of that. In general, if your building is within 15 feet of an overhead power line, contact PGE to discuss. Here's an example of a site, unfortunately, that didn't do so. They got their architectural engineering plans submitted, approved by the city, and then came to us, and we were like, those are transmission lines and distribution lines, and their proposal was extremely close. It didn't take into consideration these minimum final building clearances. And also, it was very, very close to a substation within half a block. And so, unfortunately, we said we really couldn't achieve our code requirements for safety of the building and the people within it. And so they had to go back to the drawing board. It's not ideal. Landscaping clearances. Okay, so I realize that landscaping is usually the last thing that goes in, and that but it's often considered the very, very early stages. So here are a couple pictures for you. Top of the pad, on the bottom of vaults relative to the sidewalk. The bottom left is the vault is within 12 inches of the sidewalk, and so it's flush with final grade. On the bottom right, you'll notice that it's not within 12 inches of sidewalk, and so it's 2 inches above final grade for that vault. And those are slightly greater clearances of 5 feet on the sides and behind the vault. Okay, well, that is section 2, and we're going to transition to the design phase, which is often a shorter phase. It varies amount of time, but in general, 30 to 60 days is not uncommon, though sometimes more. Um, but you'll see here that it's really important just to notify us if any changes do occur on your project plans. We're aware that they happen. Please tell us sooner than the better, so we can evaluate and make sure that our project is making consideration for those changes. Here's the list of customer gear review. These are the first set of bullets are ones that electricians on the call are often extremely familiar with. We've been using them for a very long time in a table that we send back and forth between the electricians and our meter gear engineers. And if you do want a checklist, you now have one in addition to that table. And as well as an awareness that now the meter gear engineers are not sending final review, it's the design project managers. That started in 2021. And the goal was to increase awareness of that conduit pathway, the number of conduit, the conduit routing. So the design project managers provide that final table. Though the meter gear engineers talk with the electrician, ultimately, that table could change and additional pieces of it are made available when the design project manager sends it out. If you're looking at a site that's getting redesigned, please take note that we will often require a meterman to go to the site and look at clearances. If the load is increasing, then we will require that they follow our current standards. So if it was designed 50 years ago, the standards may have changed and increased clearances may be required. So just take note that we will want somebody to go to the site to actually take a look at it and make sure we can achieve those clearances. Anything you want to add to that, Jake?
I think it's covered really well.
Okay. Electricians also just, I know I already showed it, but just want to highlight this because it's the key piece for you is that conduit installed in switchboards. We do require 3 inches from the conduit to the steel channel inside the cabinet, as well as 3 inches separation between every conduit. And we've provided a couple additional figures of that. I've zoomed into one of those here on page 55, and it's the minimum opening of the termination pull section with the typical conduit configuration. And in section of the ESR 11.6, I believe, will kind of has a list and a table of when we might require the termination pull section. But this is the first time we're providing those minimum opening dimensions to try to kind of provide easier ability to identify what gear would likely work for your project. And also right after it, we have some pictures of how people are achieving those 3-inch separation. We have a lot of creative ways of doing that, but you see a couple here that are all taking pictures of sites out in Eastern. Have anything you want to add to that, Richard?
Just make sure that you guys use chairs whenever necessary, so we can make sure that you get good backfill between all of your conduits. Yeah, that's about it.
Perfect. Okay, so last up is we've provided an approved job sketch. Now what do you do, right? Here's kind of a list of items that we expect are most likely. There could be additional ones on your list, but here are the ones that we think are likely. And the most common one that we've seen missed is that just that our approved job sketch does not contain site surveyed information. So the customers need to then take it and integrate it into their civil plan with any surveying that is necessary. And this is page 29. Oh. So with that, we have concluded sections 1 through 3. And we're going to be transitioning to the meat and potato for our construction contractors, our civil engineers, and our excavators on the call. And the first piece of that puzzle is that once an approved job sketch is issued and construction is set to begin, please schedule a pre-construction meeting or a pre-con. Bring the whole pack, or if you prefer cats, bring the whole clouder. And civil contractors, general contractors, project managers, foremen for the excavation are encouraged to attend. PGE and the team will walk through the job site there as well as the approved job sketch and align together, make sure there's no issues, that no changes have occurred in the project, that the elevation and grade are still the same, and really walk through from the transformation to the gear, what it will look like and what the stages are of that process. One of the pieces of the puzzle is that we will be asking for information about your excavation contractors. as we do require certain levels of excavation contractors. Jake, would you like to go into the details of this slide?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my camera on here. Good afternoon, everyone, or very late morning. I'm Jake Lang, manager of the line design department at the Portland Service Center here in Southeast Portland. I manage the contractor level qualifications for all the civil contractors that do excavation for projects all over the service territory. For those that don't know, there are 3 qualification levels. All 3 require that they be PGE approved. And what that means is they've signed a service agreement with PGE that has language in it about how they'll perform their work safely, reliably. Insurance levels are verified. The 3 levels pretty easily, level 1, 2, and 3. Level 3 being the most stringent, and each level is defined by kind of the size and complexity of the infrastructure being installed. So a small 1730 or a handhold box, a level 1 contractor typically can perform that work, all the way up to 10 series, 8 series, Class A vaults. Very, very large builds generally require a level 3 contractor. The contractors are reviewed and feedback provided at whatever level they're at. We are currently working with several contractors to promote them to the next level. We have level 2 contractors that someday want to be level 3, level 1s that want to be level 2, etc. It's a pretty stringent and challenging promotion to get an excavator from one level to the next because of all of the examples they have to provide and how they do their work, the quality of their work, how they respond to PGE direction. So there's a lot of things that go into it. It's very difficult to get up to higher levels, but we are trying to get them up there. The decisions on whether an excavator will be promoted or not promoted, it's not just me that makes that decision, but I work in conjunction with all of the PGE facility or field construction coordinators like Richard and Ladente and Tony Stuckert, all across all regions. The FCCs provide input on the contractors that are attempting to be promoted. At the same time, if we find that a particular contractor is not meeting PGE expectations, and we will look at reducing their level or possibly eliminating them from being a PGE approved. So I don't say that to scare anybody, but it does present a lot of challenges with developers and general contractors when this very large project kind of grinds to almost a standstill because the excavation of the PGE facilities is a challenge. So we want to make sure that those contractors are working in everyone's best interest, that they're qualified to do the work, they're doing it safely, and they're doing it correctly, because PGE is going to assume responsibility for that for the indefinite future. Marie has mentioned several times 50 years, but I think many of you have seen buildings around town that have been here and energized in their original configuration for far more than 50 years. And some of the challenges that presents in some cases when standards weren't as strict as they are today. Not sure what else to go into. So each project will have a rating or a selection of what level contractors required. The DPM can provide that. It should be on the job sketch. And if any general contractors or anyone that's in that decision point of who to hire, contact your DPM. We'll be able to provide you a list of the contractors qualified to do their particular project, whether that's level 1, 2, or 3.
Thank you, Jake, for going into that. Really appreciate it. Move on to the inspections. And this phase is probably is pretty long for the commercial customers, but relatively self-explanatory in that generally there's multiple inspections for the trench and conduit work, and that there's one final inspection for the trench and conduit work by a field construction coordinator. After that final inspection, note that there'll be another final inspection by a service inspector. So that final inspection by the field construction coordinator is for the trench and conduit pathway. Then you get the final inspection from the municipality, any additional things, and PG comes back one last time to do a final inspection of the clearances, of the labeling that might have been required, of the landscaping, etc. So that's probably the only thing that comes up on a fairly regular basis as a point of confusion. To schedule that final inspection, generally the earlier ones for the trench and conduit pathway, you'll be calling your field construction coordinator, be like, hey, can you come to site? I have a question. I think I'm ready for my inspection. For the final PG inspection, you need to call service coordination. Same line as you call for when you want to add street lights or increase the load on a temporary service or create a new job. And these are the checklists we have to consider before calling your field construction coordinator. First, for the initial trench inspection checklist, and then later the trench inspection checklist once the trench has been backfilled. Do you have anything you want to add about these inspection checklists, Richard?
No, they're all pretty self-explanatory. It's really beneficial to all parties that they look this over. Every region is a little different as far as calling in for inspection. Some could get there possibly the same day. Others might not be able to get there for 2 days. So just be prepared for that, plan accordingly for that. Especially with rainy weather. I know that your trenches fill up, trying your best to get it. During the wintertime, we've got a lot of contractors all calling at the same time. So it's advantageous to just try to plan ahead. But yeah, follow this list and you should be doing well.
I'd like
Thanks.
to add a little bit to that. So this is the list of, for most part, the minimum requirements. That project specific, there may be an instance where we need to have more than this states. So these are the minimums, depending on very specific environmental or site specific projects. These could be increased, but we'll attempt to identify that and be very clear when that occurs. But just want everyone to keep in mind, these are the minimum requirements.
You can always print off page 77, like 5 times, one for each job, and start adding any of those requirements the DPM or the field construction coordinator identifies to increase your list. So you're able to keep track of them. But we haven't previously had these checklists available for commercial customers. We've mainly done it for subdivisions, and we thought that they would be helpful as well for those working with commercial sites. Lastly up, construction requirements. This is our meat and potatoes for folks that are in the field on a daily basis. This is why we had a 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. initial training on Tuesday, same as today's, but just with awareness that if you're in the field, you can't always log into a computer to get a presentation. And we want to make this really accessible. So topics in this section are quite extensive. We don't have time to go into all of them, so I'm going to read them so you're aware of them. We have a brief review of the working overhead clearances from power lines, the customer provided trenches information largely from our ESR with the little add-ons, vault installation, all new, concrete pad installation, all new. You won't find it elsewhere. Conduit requirements, kind of a recap of our ESR requirements. Conduit installation for pad mounted transformers, conduit installation of secondary underground service to an overhead pole, conduit installed at vaults, conduit routing alignment into buildings, conduit installed on switchboards. So we're really giving you all the different options that you might see in the field. Backfill requirements, horizontal directional drilling, and barrier posts. So with that, we'll get into section 6. Here on the left is our trench excavation requirements. There should be no major surprises here. Just a kind of a comprehensive summary of key details that you'll see in section 6 of the ESR. Just note, though, that the vertical height of sweeps is typically greater than the sweep radius when installed at 90 degrees. And we try to highlight that too in our 2022 ESR with some general dimensions so people are aware that, yes, we have these minimum depth requirements, but often our sweeps are significantly greater than those minimum depth requirements. And here on the right, we have a picture in the commercial guide of a large service with 11 runs and how that trench might look, along with some pictures of similar ones with the conduit spacers visible, which are required, as well as a minimum 12-inch separation for the PGE conduits to the dry utilities. And yeah, this was a site that had done this nicely. So some pictures, again, we're trying to really increase the number of visuals. I know that a lot of folks maybe have been in the field and seen somebody pull up their phone and show them pictures, and we're trying to have them more widely accessible here. So here's the vault installation requirements with text. We have a list of approved vaults, not yet published, but hope to do so soon, ideally no later than February. And it would be on portlandgeneral.com as well. So when we are looking in to see, and do have expectation that we will have an additional vault manufacturer available to our customers soon. And so here are a list of items, including like excavate the entire area beneath the vault to a depth of 12 to 18 inches below final grade of the pad or vault to prevent settling. All soil beneath the pad site must be compacted and level before setting pad or vault. Backfill, etc. Richard, do you want to go into any details here? Vault installation, as this is your area expertise.
Yes. Where it's stating that, backfill base 6 inches. In some cases, depending on the water conditions in the ground, you might be required to go thicker. I've seen it go as thick as 18 inches with a thick base and then the 3/4 minus. It also depends on the size of the vault. You start getting into our larger 5106s, our 612s. Now you're talking a super heavy vault, and we will require more gravel. Like I said, depending on the ground conditions. Definitely, you want to backfill in 18-inch lifts. That's important. The last thing you want is any settling after everybody is gone and it's energized, because it'll come back on you as the customer, not on PGE. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Keep in mind, distance away from curbs and sidewalks. Just as it states in the ESR, if you're 12 inches or less away from a sidewalk, you have to be flush with the sidewalk. That's why generally we like them to be 12 inches or more away, so we can keep them that 2 to 3 inches proud. Survey is very important for you. Get your survey to get it right. The last thing you want to do is set like a 5106 or a 612 and have your survey wrong. And you're out of the PUE, and now it's a major undertaking to get those moved. So survey is a very important tool for you.
The conduit must enter precast vaults through the conduit terminations or cutouts, cut and poured windows. Generally, we do want conduit terminations. Just note though, the 8 and 10 series vaults come with blank walls from the old castle drawings, and docked windows are generally cut, but the customer and DPM can request conduit terminators if they know where they need to be located. So you'll talk more with your DPM if they've selected an 8 and 10 series vault for you at the site. We do have a new requirement here I want to highlight for those on the call, that our civil engineer has requested that we meet industry standards. So to please backfill in 18-inch lifts for these vaults. And here's some pictures of the vaults. The Appendix C has those, what those typical dimensions are for them. as well as how that vault installed can look visually with the lifts, depending on what materials are used for the backfill. Um, and here are pictures again of those vaults, either flush with finished grade or 2 inches above finished grade. So we understand, text is really important, but often a picture is worth 1,000 words. But please try to read the text. It really helps us and helps you so that we have a successful project. Um, Next up, conduit installed at vaults. So we first have how to install the pads, how to install the vaults, and then, okay, you install the vault or a pad. Now, how are you going to install the conduit? And so again, we have text describing that process here, but to recap, conduit must exit vaults with 3 feet of straight distance before adding a bend. And this is helpful maybe for the architects or developer engineers on the call to realize those distance will be required in the construction phase downstream. So yes, the vault and then that 3 inches, 3 feet from the vault. In some instances, when we're dealing with very large services with 5 and 6 inch conduit, PG may require actually 5 feet of straight distance out of the vault. Just be aware of that. And then pretty much all PG vaults require trench depths greater than 30 inches to reach the bottom terminators and or to be flush with the top of the transformer pads. So vaults may require 6 feet of depth or more to reach the bottom terminux. Be aware of that when kind of realizing what that trench really will look like for your project. To support that, we've made table 2 here, minimum trench depth for conduit installed at vaults. And this is an estimate. We really do encourage you to do the math yourself for your site, for your manufacturer sweeps, etc. But if you have the depth of vault top minus 2 inches, plus the depth of the 90-degree bend that you've selected, will usually equal the minimum trench depth. So you can kind of use that as a gauge for what that minimum trench depth likely is at the site. Anything you want to add to that, Richard?
I'm sorry, Maria, I missed your question.
Anything you want to add to this slide before I move on to the next one?
Just make sure that with these depths, you have shoring on hand. As the PGE representative and being a PGE job, it is up to me to make sure that you are following the safety guidelines. So these trenches can get deep. So keep that in mind. Safety first at all times.
Yeah, we all want to go home to our family and friends at the end of the day. Oh. Next up are some pictures showing that. Do you want to take over here, Richard, and kind of go back through the requirements with the pictures?
Yeah, thank you. So the top drawing up there, we need that 3 foot of straight stick coming out of the transformer vault, no matter what size, up to 6 inch. And then that's where your sweep goes on. Now you're looking at that bottom left-hand picture. You'll see the 45s. Between those 45 fittings, we need a minimum of 5 feet of straight stick for pulling purposes. Yeah, I think that looks pretty self-explanatory. It's got the chairs there, so make sure that you use your chairs. Also, another thing I wanted to bring up with backfill is in it, I believe it states it in the ESR, sand is no longer allowed to backfill PGE conduits. It's a thermal problem. So you're only allowed to backfill with 3/4 minus or native backfill. So keep that in mind with when you're using those chairs. Preferably when all the conduit is chaired up, we highly recommend that you backfill it with 3/4 minus whenever possible, just to 6 inches above the conduit. Native backfill does not want to go between those chairs and them conduits very well, and you will get a lot of settling. On these here, you look at that bottom picture with the X, as you can see, do not come out of any of the vaults straight out of it with the fitting. That's a big no-no. We got to have that 3 foot of straight stick. And the reason for that is it's polling purposes. It's trying to get, whether it's a duck roller, it's a mechanism that slides into the conduit, helps us get our wire pulled in. And when you come straight into the vault like that, we can't get that in. And it's also tension on the wire. When it's coming straight in like that, sometimes we have to rig it inside that vault and put another 45 or 90 on it with a roller. So now we've increased the tension on that almost double. That top picture, that's a very nice representation of a large service, 6-inch service. Call your FCC. We're here to work with you to help you any way we can. We're here to help you successfully get the job complete, not try to hinder you. And the more you keep us in contact, the more we can help you.
Here is
These
our page. Oh, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say these are some of our large commercials. Some of them are going to be encased. You can see how they're using their unistrut to help us keep that distance apart. The bottom right-hand one, you can see where we're going through a wall. Something that is good to know for the customer whenever you are penetrating a wall, like for gear in a basement, as it says up top there, sealing walls to prevent water and moisture intrusion in the conduit. That's going to be the responsibility of the customer. Yeah, pulling knives. You got gear in a basement, underground garage. We're going to need pulling knives. And these are things that will also be discussed with your DPM and your FCC. So it's really important. I can't stress it enough to early information. Get as much information to us as you can so we can process it and get you all the requirements that you need, and instead of you being surprised down the road. So right here, backfill requirements. When we go underneath of any footings, foundations, slabs, everything has to be encased in red dyed concrete or red dyed CDF, 5 feet out, 6 inches around. This here, it looks like they are installing the conduits before they put the footing across. Our conduits have to be a foot below the highest conduit has to be a foot below the footing, and we need red dyed CDF poured a foot out. This is an example right here. If you guys have any questions on this later, feel free to ask.
And just a note about the red dye, we do require plant mixed red dye when the CDF for
Thank you.
concrete
Yep.
is used. So that sometimes folks will be surprised by that or have forgotten that. But yes, we are looking for the high quality plant mixed red dye.
I'd like to add just, a little bit to a lot of the stuff that Richard has covered. Really stressing the importance of the pre-construction meeting. So not only, and in the guide, it's got the recommended list of stakeholders for each project be present. But keep in mind that that list is for the installation of PGE's infrastructure. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to include others that may be impacted by how this gets installed, where it gets installed, If you have someone working on the communication side that's different from the electrical side, making sure that any stakeholder for the entire project may need to participate in that pre-construction meeting so that a conflict could be identified there and addressed rather than when the ground's opened up and then suddenly there's an issue because water's coming in slightly different than where we thought, or COM has got a room next to where we're coming in. So keep in mind that this list of contractors is specific, or list of stakeholders is specific to the electrical installation, but there could be others on your site impacted by how it's going in, where it's going in, and the pathway it's taking to get there.
Yep, bring the whole pack or the whole clouder. More is better. It's only 2 hours and it can really help the whole team for a long time. Thank you. I'm going to jump forward here. Sorry for going backward. We're almost at the very end before the Q&A portion. Just wanted to remind, a lot of you have seen barrier posts, but we do require them in various situations where we feel it's necessary to ensure the safety of our equipment and the safety of the drivers around our equipment. And so here's a visual we have in the ESR as well that's duplicated here for you to see kind of what that how the spacing is required for the barrier post relative to the equipment, and that we do sometimes require them even in parking structures where there are good curbs if the equipment is within a certain distance of the curb. And it's often we try to proactively tell you, yes, we expect we're going to need a barrier post at this site, but we have noticed a lot of times that we don't fully get all the details we'd like to get, or things change. And so it is not uncommon for those to be later identified during that pre-construction phase of like, yes, now that we see this whole thing, we will need those barrier posts. So the goal is early identification, but there are times we can't do so. With that said, that ends our presentation. We're going to start with a Q&A. I don't see a lot of questions here, but we do encourage you to come ask all your questions. Before that, I'm going to give a 5-minute break here for a survey question. It's only 3 questions. It's really like, did you like the presentation? Was it helpful? Will you like one in the future? Give us that feedback. And are there any topics that you'd be interested in hearing from us? So please answer it. I will be reading all the feedback I did on Tuesday. It was very helpful for us to know. And then if you didn't get a chance to log your name and organization, please do so. So if you want a video recording of today's presentation, I can send it to you, especially if you're on a phone right now and I don't have ready access to your email. Seems like I have a question from Steve. Is this for the Q&A portion or related to the survey?
Q&A.
Give us a second. We're going to pause here for 4 minutes for the survey and the QR code. And then Steve, I will call on you in 4 minutes and ask you what your question is, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Just want to check, have folks had a chance to do the survey and the QR code if they hadn't previously? Ready to transition to that Q&A? I'll give you 2 more minutes. At 12:19, we'll start with a Q&A, and so thank you for holding on with us during this whole presentation. We're going to start that Q&A session. If you could just introduce yourself, first will be Steve and then will be Eric. I see your hand up. Just say your name and what organization you're with, and ideally, what your profession is at that organization. So Steve, why don't you go first with your question?
Thanks, Marie. I'm Steve Lockhart with MKE and Associates. We're electrical and mechanical engineers supporting contractors and architects. I have 3. First one is, will there be a Class A vault standard update published in the fairly near future? Or is there a date for one, since Class A vaults were mentioned in the presentation?
I'll start, and then you want to finish this one off, Jake? So yes, I know that one is underway and it has been for some time now. And I'm not sure what the publication date is. I'd like to say soon, but I'm not entirely sure. Jake, are you aware of when that publication date is likely?
I don't have a date or a deadline for it. I know that we do currently have a document we can share with the public, which is our Class A vault standard. Right now, we're going through it because there's some things that are now have become outdated. So we're updating it and making some final changes to it so that what we put out, we don't have to retract part of it or fill in blanks. So it should be coming soon. I would think maybe before the end of the year, but with vacation of different departments and things, it may not hit before the end of the year, but that is the goal.
Great, thank you. Would be very helpful. Question number 2 is, when we're in that pre-design phase or in design phase and we are submitting a sketch, which in our case is typically a 3D modeled conduit route from vaults to switchgear, because we do definitely take this seriously. How long is it reasonable to be able to expect a response? A week, a day, a month? Just, does the sketch look good? And it's kind of 2-part. And if we don't get a response in that time period, what is our recourse?
I would say it's probably I would think a reasonable amount of time would be about a week, because it may take time for the DPM that gets sent to get it in front of other entities that need to weigh in, whether that's the metering department, if it includes the electrical room and some dimensions, or the FCC, maybe out of the office for a day or two in the field doing inspections. So I would expect a response with information within about a week or so, a week. If it's helpful to respond that we got it, I think we should be able to do that within the same day or two, depending on the DPM being in the office the next day, scheduling wise. But sometimes, and if it's simple and straightforward, it's probably a couple of days. If there's a lot of complexity to it, it may take the full week to get it in front of those entities that need to see it.
That seems totally reasonable. That's what I was assuming. And when that doesn't happen, and if it gets to be 30, 60 days, which happens on a fairly regular basis, who do we contact if our DPM isn't getting back to us?
So I can tell you in the central region, PSC, where I'm a manager,
Yep.
contacting me would be the appropriate path.
Okay, so you are your counterparts, basically. I've got a list of.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, I can't speak for the other managers, but I would encourage them to act in the same way, that if you're not hearing back anything in 30 days, certainly, especially 60 days, that's too long to wait for a response on, so that you can move forward. So I would expect them to want to know about that as well. Okay,
that's awesome. I appreciate that, Jake. Thank you.
For the electrician on the call, or I would say Jonathan Christian and Jonathan Wilson are meter gear engineers reviewing incoming requests for gear reviews. And I would say 1 week is a little short for that you should expect more. I think we published up to 4 weeks for that. There are 2 of them that review all gears for all 4 regions. They try to do it sooner, for sure. Like, that's the goal. But I do know that they are very good at tagging and going in the order received. So in general, I think you would receive an answer, just not necessarily within a week.
Those guys are awesome. Usually it's 2 days. They're wonderful.
Yeah, to clarify that, what I interpreted Steve's question as was, if you send back your building design showing the PGE facilities being brought into the building, that's something the DPM's reviewing with FCCs and others. But if it's specific where you've submitted for gear review, that's a different topic, and that's what the guidelines that Marie lined out with our meter gear review group.
And what's your last question, Steve, before we go to Eric?
Those were my 3. I just how long and what do we do if not? So we're good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just one last comment on Steve on your first question for the Class A vault when it's updated. I've made note that you're interested in it, but we don't publish that one in our portlandgeneral.com backscore ESR. It's a need to know. It is a public standard, but not the one that's publicly available on the website. So just FYI.
You would need to request a copy of it from the DPM assigned to your project.
You bet. Sounds good. Thanks.
So you're up, Eric, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, hi. Thanks, Marie. My name is Eric Go. I'm electrical engineer with PGE Consulting Engineers. Electrical, mechanical, plumbing, we do all sorts of things. And I get involved and help out a lot of folks on our team with various, project PGE coordination topics, including the Class A vault standards. And I'm glad Steve asked his question, because it kind of helped frame the way I want to ask my question, which is, I have the design and construction guide for 2022, and I noticed on page 12, the top of page 12, that paragraph references the LD 3107 standard, and I've requested that standard, the latest version of it, and been told that it's been it's working on being updated. The latest version I have is dated 5/13/2021. I just wanted to confirm that that is the latest version, and that the version um, that Jake is mentioning being updated. I'd kind of like to find out how do I find out what is already outdated in that version that I have. So that's my kind of the first part of my question, and then I had more of a general question about, we have a lot of projects both in the downtown core, but also outside of the downtown core now that have zero lot lines where there is no space next to a sidewalk for a transformer. And, in the past, we've done, 1024 volts and, smaller subsurface transformer vaults. And I guess the general consensus seems to be that we're getting away from doing anything other than uh, uh, the Class A vault, based on the current standard. So I was just hoping you and Jake could maybe talk about that a little bit more and what the status is and where PG is going with this design. Because, I've got a project in Carlton right now, for example, there's no space on the site for a transformer, and we don't know what to do.
Okay, so I'm not sure, although I've been to Carlton many times, I'm not sure I can speak to that one, but you're correct. We're going away from the submersible transformers, especially in right-of-way. That was a practice that we started doing outside the core about 12 or 15 years ago, due to a lot of the constraints that are still constraints. But what we found in those particular installations that they're just not reliable. The vaults fill up with water, debris, everything the public can get through the vents. And so we've made the determination that it's just not a safe and reliable practice to continue installing those. So we are requiring either on-site transformation or pole-mounted transformation going forward. We'll have to deal with the installations that we have allowed and built, but because of the unreliable nature of those builds, we're having to stop that practice. As far as the location in the building, I'm working with the city of Portland. That obviously they have a jurisdiction. That doesn't mean that they're speaking for all cities and communities that we serve, but we're working with the city of Portland because they do not like transformers in the right of way either, both because of the nature of the safety, where you now have something that's underneath people's feet that represents a risk to the public, as well as the amount of space they occupy in the right of way. So the city of Portland is working with us on trying to together come up with plans and ideas so that building designs maintain the live frontage of the building and all of their requirements from engineering standpoint, aesthetic standpoint, useful space standpoint. So we're coming up with some ideas on how to pursue Class A vaults within the city of Portland that meets their requirements as well as ours. I can't say that's going to work in every jurisdiction, but generally speaking, we go through these discussions and negotiations and work through the issues in the city of Portland, and that kind of radiates out once we have a plan to move forward. So I could, if we want to talk offline, I might be able to help our counterparts in the southern region that cover Carlton on different options that might be available. But I can't promise we'll find a great solution, but at least I can share with our southern region some of the ways that we accommodate those zero lot line buildings where there's just not space to get the transformer on property.
And is this a job assigned to Terry Neal in Southern?
Yeah, that's Terry's job.
I've seen this one. Okay, yeah, I can, Jake, I can send you a message in Terry so that you can discuss further um, on that
Okay.
Carlton one.
Maria?
And then Jake, was there,
Maria?
thanks
Hey,
for that
Richard,
response. I was just curious what if there was anything you wanted to highlight that was outdated in the current vault standard.
I can't think of specific items off the top of my head, but most of them revolve around access to get the transformers into the rooms. Many of the technical pieces aren't changing. It's more about what clearances and separations we need both inside the vault and in front of the doors or above the doors to get the equipment in and out of the room.
Got it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Richard, it sounded like you want to add something.
Yes, as far as down in Southern, I've reached out to the FCCs down there and let them know that I will work with them and try to help them and any designers with any Class A vaults. It's new to them. Here in Western, I take care of all the Class A's, as Ladente does most of them down in the core. So down in Carlton, if somebody has any questions, and they want to reach out, I'll be more than happy to help out with the permission of the DPM down there, of course, and the FCC.
Thanks, Richard.
What other questions do people have that they'd like to ask us today?
While somebody may be contemplating what to ask, obviously, with the invite to this meeting, PGE recognizes that you guys, guys and ladies, in the industry do a lot of work with PGE on multiple projects. We would really encourage project-specific feedback when we design jobs. Generally, survey requests are sent out for customers to respond based on that project's feedback at that stage. Please, if you have issues that came up, or hopefully things went great, we would appreciate both kinds of feedback. Me as a manager in the group, I'm always trying to improve our processes, train up DPMs so that we can be at a point where no matter what DPM is assigned to your project or which FCC is assigned to your project, that we're providing the highest level of service that we can. And I can't know about issues with individuals or different project types without the feedback of you guys, our customers.
Any additional questions before we close today? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Can't thank you enough. And we will be sending out an email tomorrow with a transcript of this presentation, as well as some upcoming updates to standards that we expect. Thank you again, and looking forward to working with you in the future. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank everyone for your time today.